So Representative Khanna, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate all of your work on supporting the Stop Cheaters Act and also supporting this idea of a wealth tax. I mean, the reality is that 93% of American wealth is invested in the United States. I think it's 1% or so in the Cayman Islands and 1.5% in Europe, in England. So the idea that there's going to be some massive flight of American capital if there was a 2% wealth tax is just not true. It's defied by all of the economic facts. This is still the best place in the world to invest. The Stop Cheaters Act, which you have supported, is so important because it would help overcome this tax gap where the wealthiest 1% are not paying literally the taxes that they owed. This is not about tax avoidance. This is not about having rates that are too low. This is simply that they are cheating on their tax bill. And we, in an absurd way, are auditing the 5 counties that are most audited are low-income African-American counties. And the auditing isn't happening for the top 1%, which account for almost 70% of the gap in terms of the taxes that are owed and the taxes that are actually collected. This bill, which you're supporting, and I want to thank you for that, would raise $1 trillion over 10 years and even up to $1.5 trillion, which is a huge amount of money. I mean, it could fund infrastructure across this country. It could fund free public college across this country. And it would do that by increasing IRS enforcement and calling for audits for the top 1%. Now, what we have to understand is in this country, we audit more people who get the earned income tax credit, concerned about whether a grandmother is claiming an earned income tax credit for her grandchild when the parent already is, or whether 2 divorced parents are both claiming the same earned income tax credit. We're more concerned about nickel and diming that than we are about making sure that multimillionaires are paying their fair share of tax. And all of this legislation is saying is let's have a beefed up IRS staff and enforcement. So we're auditing those who have large tax bills, and we're collecting that money. This should be, frankly, something that everyone from all sides of the aisle agrees to, because it's not about what rate you set the tax at. It's not about a trade-off. It's simply about, do you believe in a rule following society or not? If there's a rule, should we enforce those rules? And that's what this bill does. So I really am grateful to you for your support and endorsement. I hope we can get a tremendous amount of co-sponsors. Dr. Larry Summers and Dr. Sarin have helped us with this legislation, and they're supportive of it. And my goal is to get this in January so we can hopefully pass it and before President Biden and Vice President Harris take office, and give them the resources to do more bold things.
Great. And Representative Khanna, can you tell us what's happened to the IRS in the last several decades?
Well, they've been gutted. The IRS has been gutted. I mean, the IRS doesn't have enough enforcement officials. They're unable to do actual, in many cases, proper estimates or refunds. They don't have the staff, and they don't have the staff for enforcement. So it's both a lack of enforcement, but because they don't have the personnel, and wrong priorities, where they're going after poor, minority, working class communities more than the wealthy, who actually have the largest tax bills.
And Representative Khanna, we have a question from Trish. What is your assessment of the Biden administration's ability to change this situation?
It's strong. I mean, this is something, like I said, obviously I'm on the progressive side, but this is something Larry Summers has pushed for, who was an economist known to be more centrist, and was with the Obama administration, worked with Biden. So I don't see the downside to this. This is not saying we have to raise taxes. It's not calling for a wealth tax. It's simply saying collect the taxes that are already due. And so I actually think this is an easy win for the Biden administration, and I'm optimistic that they'll do it. We need to get as many co-sponsors as possible on the legislation.
And how are your Republican colleagues going to react to this?
Well, we don't know yet. We're going to reach out to Rob Portman, who I've done some legislation with in the Senate, and maybe look to a few more moderate members in the House. But that's what we need to do.
And then here's a great question, just a general one. Why is Congress so hesitant or unable to raise taxes on the rich?
Well, the hesitation is the blunt hesitation is, as I think, is the fundraising. A lot of them are in districts that require funding from donors. They are colored by their worldview, and they fear that this raising the tax on the rich will hurt them politically. We're unable to message clearly when people say, "Oh, you're going to raise taxes on the rich." Sometimes the middle class, upper middle class feels that the taxes are going to go up on them. But the other thing is the taxing the rich is not the lead. It's the secondary impact, a secondary statement. In other words, and I believe this genuinely, the first slogan shouldn't be "let's tax the rich." The first slogan should be "let's give everyone health care and education." And then how do we pay for it? Well, we need to tax the rich. It's not that being rich, in my view, is a crime. It's not that, and here I disagree with certain progressives. I have no problem that Steve Jobs was a billionaire. I have no problem about it. He wasn't a great human being, but I think he contributed to economic growth. My problem is why are there so many people in this country who don't have education, who don't have healthcare, who don't have nutrition, who don't have a housing to live in? And so what we ought to say is these are the goals of a decent society that has freedom for everyone. And now we need to pay for it. Well, it makes sense to tax people like Steve Jobs so that these people can pay for it.
And we have a question from Grant. What are the odds tax legislation that could include some of the changes mentioned by our presentation could move in the first 2 years of the Biden term?
Well, I think that the best chances of moving is to move up some of the marginal tax rates on the wealthy. I do think there can be some movement on treating ordinary income, capital gains as ordinary income for those over $1 million, which was Biden's proposal. I think this is something that can move the proper enforcement of taxes. But of course, a lot depends on Mitch McConnell and the Georgia races. And so the prospects of tax proposals moving are highly contingent on the composition of the Senate.
And we have a question. Middle-class tech workers in your district, Representative Khanna, have 401ks which are comprised of stocks. A 2% wealth tax would mean that every December, the billionaires will sell off a bulk of stock, which would tank our 401ks. How do you account for that?
I think most middle-class tech workers in my district who have 401ks are doing fine, and that's how I account for it. And I don't think that's. I mean, if you're in a 401k and you're working at Apple or Google, or that's not the concern. The concern is people who are in working families who are struggling to make ends meet. I do think that we need to reinstitute the SALT deduction and have affordable housing, and those are and better commuting. Those are, I think, much bigger issues in my district.
Does the IRS need more funding to go after the rich tax cheats, or is it just political will that's lacking?
We need more funding, and this bill would cost $100 billion to get more staffing, more funding. It's not just political will. They need actually better staffing, better agency. I mean, it's simple. Think about a basketball game. If you only had one referee instead of three referees, obviously if you have three referees, you'll have more fouls that you'll be able to call. The same thing about tax enforcement. We don't have enough referees.
Great. Let's see. So wealthy people, one person has a concern about people either leaving the state or leaving the country if we raise their taxes. What are your thoughts on that, Congressman?
Well, like I said on the wealth tax, and I've been waiting for anyone who makes this argument to show me data contrary. 93% of American wealth is in the United States. And that makes sense. Why would you want to invest elsewhere? I mean, do you really want to bet that your portfolio money is going to do better in China with all of the challenges, or India than it would in the United States for all our problems? Look at the S&P 500 over the last 5 years. It's been driven by tech. So people are rationally betting in the United States. So if 93% of wealth is in the United States and only 1.5% in the Cayman Islands or Britain, this idea that there's going to be capital flight is about as true as the people who told me they would leave the country if Donald Trump became president. Let me tell you, they're still here because America is still a great place to live, and they'll still have their wealth here if we have this tax. It's very different. You can't having a wealth tax for a state is much harder. I can see people moving from Texas to California or New York, but not a wealth tax on a country. We have too many assets. It's why our interest rates are so low. We've been the reserve currency. It's not just that we want to invest here, everywhere else in the world wants to invest here.
Yeah, there's capital flight into the United States, not out of the United States.
Sharon asks, sometimes charities are used to hide taxable money. How is that done?
Well, of course, they're non-legitimate charities or charities that aren't, really making contributions. And I don't have the statistics there. I think something we can ask Dr. Sarin and Dr. Summers, who did this, to look into how much of the tax evasion is based on charities. But it definitely, enforcement should be our first. It's the low-hanging fruit.
And they want to know, will you go through the bill a little bit more if you would? Like, what's the name of it and what are the specific pieces it does? We have a question about more detail for your bill.
It's the Stop Cheaters Act.
It's a very straightforward title.
Yeah,
It's great.
Stop Cheaters Act. We're going to introduce it in January, and it puts $100 billion into the IRS over 10 years to get the IRS, the staff, so that they can do the audits and the enforcement, and it requires audits for those who are the highest taxpayers in the 1%, and then enforcement on them, and says, look, we're not going to tax we're not going to have tax audits for those on EITC or the poorest Americans. We ought to have tax audits for those with the largest bill. I mean, it's actually quite common sense. You don't need an economist at Harvard or Penn like Summers and Sarin to figure this out. I mean, they have, and I applaud them for it, but this is pretty common sense.
And what if you don't pass your bill and things continue? How bad could it get?
Well, the audit, the avoidance, evasion would continue, and we'd still have issues on revenue and underinvestment in education, underinvestment in healthcare. I studied economics as an undergrad at University of Chicago, and people think about the Chicago school, but Gary Becker there, I highly recommend his paper. He's unfortunately passed as a Nobel laureate, started in part the Chicago school, and he came up with the idea of human capital theory, which was basically that in a digital technology age, the biggest investment people can make is in human capital. And so even if you don't come at this from a perspective of fundamental fairness, from a philosophical perspective of what is fair, we should as a society be investing in people's health and education. We should be investing in their nutrition and their housing. This is what creates the citizenry that can produce innovation and wealth for the future. And that is why we need to have a tax to afford those things.
Fabulous. Tom says, in some countries, the government pre-fills your tax form, and then you can modify it if you need to. Would that help?
I'm open to that, and I know there's several bills that have asked for that. I mean, I think it would simplify things, and it may help with compliance as well. My guess is that the top 1 or 2% are not going to be using that, but for many other people, I think it could help.
And Representative, what are your thoughts on the new Argentina wealth tax? Can't we just do that here?
I'm not familiar with the details of Argentina's wealth tax, and I'd have to learn more about the proposal.
Okay, let's see. Can you explain marginal tax rates? I feel like this gets misrepresented in the media a lot.
Well, marginal tax rate is very simple. It just means that you get taxed for the income above a certain threshold. So if you make $200,000 and or $250,000, and the tax rate is 39% for income over 250,000, it's not that your entire income is subject to the higher threshold. It's your income is once you cross a certain threshold, your income is subject to that higher tax.
My parents always say that there has always been income and wealth inequality in America. How do I convince them that it's a problem now more than ever?
Well, I think you should look at some data. I mean, the worker productivity has increased extraordinarily, but the pay has not, and that was not the case up through 1968. In 68, worker productivity increased along with pay. The reality is that I think I read somewhere that almost $50 trillion, which could have gone to the bottom 50%, has ended up in the top 1%. So there are a lot of studies out there about how much of the wealth has been concentrated and how much it's hurt the working and middle class. As a matter of absolute poverty, I don't know, that may have declined, although there's still a lot of poor and low wealth individuals. But when you look at the working class, middle class, there's no doubt that we're not as well off as we used to be.
Great. This has been a fabulous discussion. We have a few minutes before we close. I'd love to hear just some closing thoughts from each one of our patriots, and then hear from Representative Khanna. Chuck, closing thoughts?
Well, I just really appreciate your leadership, Representative Khanna, on the enforcement issue. One thing we know is that the top 0.1% has a lot of resources to hire the wealth defense industry, the tax attorneys and wealth managers, and they spend a huge amount of resources making the tax system more complicated and helping the rich avoid taxes. And I think giving the IRS the resources and the capacity to go after these dynasty trusts that are parking, billions of dollars in South Dakota and Wyoming, and being able to enforce would restore fairness and in the tax code. I think your leadership is absolutely critical, and so many thanks for paying attention to that issue. And it is something I think we can do early in this next term, and it'll set up other tax fairness proposals even better. So thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Chuck.
Kristen, closing thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Representative Khanna. That was we're so happy to have you here today. And I want to say to everyone, to Rep Khanna's point, the race in Georgia is pretty important in terms of what gets done during this next term. And I think any resources, effort, support we can give to that race, and being able to update our broken tax code is imperative.
Morris?
Thank you.
Sure. I want to thank Representative Khanna for all of your work and leadership. I think this is really a crucial issue because the whole strategy of the Republican side is to first allow everyone to cheat and then tell all the middle class people, oh, everyone's cheating anyway, you shouldn't have any taxes, you shouldn't have any government. And we really have to reverse that. We really have to say that taxes are a patriotic thing to have, and that everyone is going to pay their taxes fairly, and we're going to stop people from cheating. And that's what Representative Khanna's bill is trying to do. So I applaud you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And just ask you to close this up. Representative Khanna, thank you so much. A few closing thoughts from you and how people can help.
Well, I appreciate it. I think that this is such an important group because you have succeeded, you have done well, and yet you understand the importance of fairness and in investment in our community. My view, I have a strong belief that America has to be an entrepreneurial society, that we have to be an innovation society, that we have to be a society that is welcome for business and supports business. I don't think we ought to feed into the false Republican attacks of that somehow we're not for business or not for entrepreneurship. But we have to say that the way that we build innovation, entrepreneurship, and business is by investing in people. That the genius of America is that we don't have a particular class of people who do the innovative and hard work, that we invest broadly and believe in the talent and potential of every American. And that's ultimately what tax fairness is about. So I would appreciate your continued support of the Stop Cheaters Act and look forward to working with you.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody. If you want more information, go to taxtherich.com. Representative Khanna, thank you so much. We so appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.